When a man ignores a woman who once watered his world with presence, kindness, and love, he thinks he's walking away strong, but what he's really doing is walking away small, because the greatest weakness of a man is not in his fists, his failures, or his fears. It is in his silence when he should have stood present. There's something haunting about being ignored by someone you once gave your fire to. The silence becomes louder than screams, and the absence feels like betrayal dressed as distance. But let me be clear, when a man ignores a woman, especially one who loved him deeply, it's not just an action, it's a revelation. A mirror reflecting not her worth, but his wound. This is not a speech about bitterness. This is a revelation about the silent truth women carry and the subtle weakness some men try to hide behind their cold indifference. This speech will speak to the woman who doubts her voice because he stopped answering her calls, to the woman who lowers her light because he stopped noticing, and to the man who thinks ignoring her was power when it was proof of his deepest fragility. Stay with me through every word, because by the end of this speech, you'll know exactly why being ignored does not define you, but it exposes everything about him. When a man begins to ignore a woman who has given her love, time, and soul, the silence is often mistaken for strength. But silence, when used to escape, to punish, or to control, is not strength. It is fear dressed in false pride. It is insecurity masquerading as maturity. A man who cannot speak his truth, who disappears into silence instead of stepping into honesty, is not standing tall. He is shrinking behind a wall he doesn't know how to climb over. His silence doesn't make him mysterious. It makes him emotionally unavailable, emotionally fragile, and emotionally unfit to hold space for a real connection. Let's be real. When someone chooses to ignore you, it triggers a deep and painful response. You start questioning yourself. Did I say too much? Did I come on too strong? Was I too emotional? But what if we flipped that mirror? What if his silence is not a reflection of your too muchness, but of his not enoughness? What if his ignoring is not your rejection, but his retreat? A retreat from the kind of vulnerability he never learned how to manage. Because a man who is secure in himself, a man who knows how to love without ego, does not disappear. He shows up, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. His silence is not stillness, it's avoidance. Avoidance of the very things that make love worth having: depth, honesty, accountability, and the willingness to grow. You see, a secure man knows that communication is a bridge, not a battlefield. He knows that love is not a power play, but an insecure man, he confuses control with strength. He withholds his voice to feel big. He withholds his presence to feel important. But what he's really doing is announcing, without saying a word, that he is terrified of being seen for who he really is. Because to be present in a relationship, especially when things get real, takes courage. It takes the courage to admit when you're wrong, the courage to say, I don't know what to do, but I want to work through this. The courage to say, I'm scared, but I'm here. And courage, let's not forget, isn't about being unafraid. It's about showing up despite the fear. But when a man lacks that courage, he vanishes, not because you're unworthy, but because he is unequipped. He's unequipped to deal with the emotional weather that comes with real connection. So he retreats into silence like a boy hiding under the bed from a thunderstorm. But grown love requires grown tools. And silence as a weapon is a tool of the emotionally immature. It's a tool used by someone who doesn't yet know how to navigate the storms without running for cover. It's not noble. It's not powerful. It's not protective. It's a defense mechanism, a quiet alarm screaming, "I don't know how to be here. I don't know how to hold this." This is where so many women get caught because silence makes you second guess your value. You replay your words. You dissect your tone. You wonder if maybe you should have done less, said less, felt less. But let me tell you something with all the love and fire I can muster. Your intensity is not the problem. Your honesty is not the problem. Your love is not too much. His capacity is too small. A man who ignores you is not showing you that you're unlovable. He's showing you the limits of his emotional bandwidth. And sometimes the hardest pill to swallow is this: you can be everything a person ever wanted and still not be enough for someone who is not ready to face himself, not ready to open up, not ready to be held accountable, not ready to love you without conditions or games or power plays. And so he chooses silence. But silence, when used as escape, is louder than any words could ever be. It says, "I don't know how to handle this," or worse, "I don't want to try." It says, "I'm too afraid to be vulnerable," or "I don't care enough to be courageous." And no matter what his ego tries to convince him or you of, that is not strength. That is fear. That is insecurity in its rawest form. Let's also talk about the emotional manipulation that often hides behind silence. Because some men don't just ignore you because they're afraid. They ignore you to punish you, to make you feel small, to make you wonder, to tip the scale of power in their favor. This is when silence becomes cruel, calculated. It's no longer just a shield for their fear, but a weapon to create doubt in you, to make you question your worth. And when you start chasing, apologizing, over-explaining just to get a response, that's when they feel powerful. But it's fake power, hollow power. And the moment you stop chasing, the illusion shatters. Because here's the truth: real power is not in being pursued. Real power is in presence, in accountability, in vulnerability. A man who uses silence as a sword is not strong, he's terrified. Terrified of being seen, terrified of connection, terrified of the responsibility that comes with being truly loved. And you are not crazy for caring. You are not needy for needing communication. You are not clingy for wanting clarity. You are a whole, loving human being who deserves presence, not punishment. Conversation, not confusion. Attention, not absence. And if a man cannot give you that, it is not your burden to carry. It is his reflection to face. Don't romanticize his silence. Don't turn his distance into some mystic test of your worth. Don't let your mind paint his ignoring as some kind of mysterious masculine depth. It's not depth, it's dysfunction. It's not mystery, it's a mask. And when that mask falls, and it always does, you'll see what was really underneath all along. Fear, doubt, and insecurity too big to admit. But you are not here to babysit someone's emotional avoidance. You are not here to decode messages hidden in silence. You are here to love and be loved with honesty, clarity, and presence. And if someone cannot meet you there, don't you dare walk away blaming yourself. You didn't fail. You just outgrew the game. So the next time a man ignores you, remember this: it's not always rejection. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's the universe pulling you away from someone who was never going to grow. And sometimes it's just a mirror showing you that your presence was never the problem. His absence was just the proof, because silence might seem like strength. But the loudest silence in the world is the silence of a man who's too scared to love. And that silence, it screams insecurity. When a man chooses avoidance over honesty, when he sidesteps conversations that matter and evades the emotional truth sitting right in front of him, he's not being calm. He's being emotionally illiterate. This isn't the kind of silence that brings peace or reflection. It's the kind that builds walls, not bridges. It's a defense, a dodge, a quiet declaration that says, I don't know how to handle what I feel, so I won't even try. And that is not wisdom. That is emotional immaturity parading as stoicism. We've been taught to see men who withdraw as strong, as composed, as in control. But let's look deeper. The man who avoids hard conversations, who shuts down when things get vulnerable, who pretends like nothing happened when everything has changed, that man is not centered. He is hiding. He is protecting an emotional vocabulary that never learned to speak. And what he fears more than losing a good woman is having to face the mirror she holds up to him. Avoidance isn't a personality trait. It's a learned behavior rooted in discomfort with emotional responsibility. When he was growing up, maybe no one taught him how to name his feelings. Maybe every time he felt overwhelmed, someone told him to man up or stop crying or don't be soft. And so instead of growing into emotional fluency, he grew into silence. He grew into defensiveness. He learned to walk out before he breaks down, to disconnect before he can be rejected, to pretend nothing hurts because he doesn't know how to say it does. So when you bring up something real, when you ask him to talk, to feel, to be present, he disappears. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. He changes the subject. He gets sarcastic. He tells you you're overreacting, or he just stops responding altogether. And while you're left tangled in your thoughts, wondering if you did something wrong, he gets to avoid looking at himself. This is where emotional illiteracy becomes dangerous, because in relationships, communication is the foundation. And if one person is building while the other keeps disappearing, what's built won't last. A man who avoids conflict may believe he's preserving the peace, but what he's really doing is delaying the explosion. Bottled feelings don't evaporate, they detonate. And silence over time becomes louder than any argument ever could. Emotional avoidance is not harmless. It teaches you, the woman in his life, to question your emotions. It teaches you to lower your voice, to minimize your needs, to apologize for even wanting to connect. And that's where the damage creeps in, not in the blowout fights, but in the slow erosion of your self-worth. You start walking on eggshells. You start translating his moods like a foreign language. You start believing that maybe expecting emotional availability is asking too much, but it's not. It never was. Being able to sit in an uncomfortable conversation to say, I don't have the answers, but I'm here, to admit that hurt me, or I'm scared, or I need you. That is emotional fluency. That is grown love. And a man who avoids that is not protecting you or himself. He's avoiding growth. He's avoiding intimacy. He's avoiding becoming the man he thinks he already is. Avoidance also tricks him into thinking he's safe. He doesn't have to be vulnerable. He doesn't have to risk rejection. He doesn't have to deal with feelings that make him uncomfortable. But what he doesn't realize is that every time he runs, every time he avoids, every time he pretends not to feel, he loses something. He loses connection. He loses trust. He loses the depth that only emotional honesty can build. And one day, he'll look around and wonder why people stop trying, why the woman who once poured into him no longer reaches out, why the space he used to fill with presence now feels cold with silence. He'll call it distance. He'll say things just changed. But the truth is, emotional avoidance built that distance one unspoken truth at a time. It's easy to say nothing. It's easy to walk away. What's hard is staying, sitting in discomfort, being vulnerable when you'd rather be strong, being open when every instinct says to close off. But that's what makes real connection possible. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but courage. And the saddest part, most emotionally avoidant men don't even know they're doing it. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they've buried those feelings so deep, they're scared to dig them out. They think if they start talking, they'll unravel. But unraveling is not the end. It's the beginning of healing, of growth, of intimacy that doesn't just survive, it thrives. So if you're loving a man who avoids, you have a choice to make. You can keep knocking on a door he refuses to open, or you can walk through a door where emotional honesty is welcomed, where your feelings aren't seen as threats but as bridges, where your desire for connection isn't called drama, but honored as the foundation of a real relationship. Because let's be clear, your emotional needs are not a burden. Your desire to talk things through is not too much. Your call for presence is not a weakness, it's a strength. And if a man can't meet you in that space, it's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of his unreadiness. Avoidance is not strength. It's a silent scream of a man who never learned to speak his own heart. Emotional illiteracy is not a life sentence, but it is a choice. And a man who chooses to avoid is choosing to stay in the shallow end of love. But you were made for deep waters. When he chose to ignore you, to act like your presence was forgettable, he made one quiet but fatal mistake. He underestimated your resilience. He thought you would break. He thought your world would crumble without his attention. He believed somewhere in the hollowness of his ego that your worth was tied to how much space he allowed you to occupy in his life. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know that beneath your softness lives a strength forged through fire. He didn't know that you have risen from worse silences, darker nights, and heavier betrayals. He thought the lack of a reply would silence your spirit. He thought his absence would feel like punishment, but instead, you transformed the silence into self-discovery. You turned the unanswered messages into lessons, the unread texts into liberation. What he thought would make you weaker became the very soil where your strength bloomed. That's the thing about a woman with soul. She doesn't wilt in the absence of attention. She adapts, she rebuilds, and eventually she forgets to miss you. He imagined you waiting, checking your phone, wondering, obsessing, but the truth is you did that for a moment. You questioned yourself, you rewound the conversations, you wondered if maybe you were too much, too emotional, too intense, too present, and then something inside of you shifted. The part of you that knows who you really are began to wake up, and suddenly his silence wasn't as loud, his absence wasn't as devastating. Your need for him began to dissolve, and in its place, your self-respect began to roar. That's the mistake he made. He confused your kindness for weakness. He mistook your loyalty for dependence, but you weren't attached, you were invested. There's a difference. You weren't clinging. You were choosing him again and again from a place of love. But when he stopped showing up, when he stopped choosing you, you didn't chase. You recalibrated. Because love is never meant to be begged for. And respect isn't something you convince someone to give. It's something they either see in you or they don't. And when they don't, you walk. You see, a resilient woman doesn't need closure to heal. She writes her own ending. She doesn't need apologies to grow. She makes peace with unanswered questions, and she doesn't need him to come back to validate what she already knows. She was never the one who was lacking. She was never the one who gave too much. She was the one who offered depth in a world that feeds on the surface. She was the one who stayed steady when he turned into a shadow. And now, after all the silence, after all the pretending not to notice, after all the emotional hiding, she is still standing, but not the same, not softer in the way he assumed. No, she's more grounded now, more aware. She knows what she brings to the table. She knows that the right man won't play hide and seek with her value. He'll see her clearly. He'll honor her presence. He won't flinch at her fire. He'll rise to meet it. He underestimated your ability to evolve without him. He thought he was the gravity holding your world together, but really, he was just passing through. You were your own center all along. And now, the power dynamic has shifted. Because nothing shakes a man more than realizing the woman he ignored is not broken, but glowing. That the silence he thought would punish her became her sanctuary. That she didn't just survive his absence, she mastered it. And while he may come back one day, maybe with a message, maybe with a memory, maybe with that familiar hey that once would have made your heart skip, you won't respond the same. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because you'll remember how hard you worked to rebuild. You'll remember the nights you held yourself together. You'll remember that every step you took alone made you stronger than you ever thought you could be. What he didn't count on was your capacity to heal in solitude. He thought your silence would be waiting, but your silence turned into strength. Your quiet became sacred. You started choosing peace over patterns, truth over games, and growth over nostalgia. You stopped wondering what he was thinking and started focusing on what you were becoming. And in that becoming, you found everything you thought you lost. Resilience is not about never hurting. It's about not letting the hurt define you. And you, in all your pain, chose transformation. You didn't hide. You didn't collapse. You didn't shrink into the version of yourself that needed his validation to feel whole. You rose. And the version of you that exists now, she's rooted, she's wise, she's awake. He will see you again, maybe not in person, but in the life he couldn't handle, in the joy he wasn't brave enough to contribute to, in the love you'll one day give to someone who knows what to do with it. And when that moment comes, he'll realize the truth. He didn't leave a woman who needed him. He left a woman who only ever needed one thing: truth. And truth is this: your resilience was never for show. It was the quiet strength that got you through the storms he didn't even stay to witness. It was the fire that never needed fuel from his attention. It was the reminder that no matter who walks away, you will always, always rise. When a man behaves with indifference toward a woman who has poured her heart, her time, her energy, and her presence into him, he may think he is demonstrating strength. He may believe that withholding emotion gives him power, that silence creates allure, that coldness keeps him in control. But what he's really revealing, without ever saying a word, is a kind of spiritual and emotional poverty that no amount of masculine posturing can hide. Indifference is not power. It's the lack of it. It's not wisdom. It's weakness disguised as detachment. There's a dangerous myth that's crept into our culture, one that celebrates men who are aloof, unavailable, and emotionally untouchable, as if being distant means being desirable, as if holding back means holding power. But here's what's true: indifference is not a flex. It is a fracture. A man who cannot care or who chooses not to is not strong. He is starved. Starved of emotional depth, of vulnerability, of real intimacy. He may wear apathy like armor, but beneath it lies a hollow space where love should live. To be indifferent is to deny someone the most basic form of acknowledgement: recognition. When a man chooses to be indifferent, he isn't just creating space, he is sending a message. A message that says, "You don't matter enough for me to try." And that message, over time, seeps into the spirit of the woman on the receiving end. She begins to question her own voice, her own needs, her own worth. She starts to wonder if maybe love is supposed to feel like a guessing game, if affection must always be earned, if silence is the price of connection. But let us be clear: indifference is not mystery, it is cruelty. Because it is intentional, it is a decision to disengage, to emotionally starve a bond while pretending to remain neutral. It's the silent treatment stretched out over days, weeks, even months. It's the cold responses, the lack of eye contact, the way he shrugs off your emotions like dust from his shoulder, and all the while he thinks he's in control, that he holds the upper hand. But what he's holding is not power, it's emptiness. True power is presence. It's saying, I see you, I hear you, I may not have all the answers, but I care enough to stay in the room with you. It takes real strength to show up for someone emotionally, to be available, to be honest, to be human. Indifference, on the other hand, is the easiest escape route. It requires nothing, no vulnerability, no accountability, no growth. It's emotional laziness dressed as superiority. And yet, so many women have been conditioned to chase that indifference, to believe that a man who doesn't respond is more valuable than one who does, that emotional unavailability is somehow proof of importance, that if you just do a little more, be a little more, prove a little more, you'll finally earn his warmth. But love is not a test, and attention is not a prize. A man who cares will show it, not in grand gestures, but in consistent presence, in how he listens, in how he makes you feel safe, not small, in how he responds when you're at your most vulnerable. But the man who chooses indifference, he is not protecting himself, he is avoiding himself. Because if he truly allowed himself to feel, to connect, to show up, he'd have to confront everything he's tried to bury. His past wounds, his failures, his fears of inadequacy. So instead of healing, he hides. Instead of growing, he guards. Instead of loving, he withholds. And he calls it strength. You can always tell the difference between a man who's been raised on emotional scarcity and one who's been nurtured in love. The former believes love is something to be rationed, that affection should be earned, that silence is leverage. But the latter knows that love, when it's real, flows freely. It does not manipulate. It does not disappear. It does not make you wonder where you stand. Indifference is proof that he cannot hold what is sacred, that he is disconnected from the very thing that makes us human, empathy. It's the sign of a man who's surviving off emotional crumbs because he never learned to sit at the table of true intimacy. And that is poverty, not financial, but emotional. The kind that leaves relationships malnourished and hearts longing for connection they'll never receive from him. He may think he's unbothered, that he's above it all. But one day, whether it's in the quiet of his solitude or in the echo of an empty relationship, he'll feel the cost of that indifference. He'll look for depth and find only distance. He'll reach for connection and find no one left to call, because eventually even the most devoted woman gets tired of knocking on a locked door. Even the warmest soul grows cold when met with enough silence. And you are not weak for wanting more. You are not dramatic for needing consistency. You are not clingy for desiring communication. You are human. And love, real love, is not indifferent. It is attentive. It is nourishing. It is reciprocal. If he cannot give that, it is not because you are unworthy. It is because he is unequipped. So the next time a man tries to use indifference as a means of control, remember this. Indifference is not power, it is absence. And presence is where power truly lives, not in the cold shoulder, but in the warm hand that stays. Not in the silence, but in the words that offer understanding. Not in emotional distance, but in the sacred courage to come closer, even when it's uncomfortable. Real men don't weaponize apathy. They don't punish with silence. They don't pretend not to care as a means of control. Real men care out loud. They love without games. They choose presence over power plays. And if he cannot do that, then what he's offering you is not protection. It's emotional poverty in disguise. Don't confuse his emotional lack with your emotional too muchness. You are not too deep. He is too shallow. You are not too intense. He is too numb, and you are not asking for too much. You are simply asking for what's real. So don't chase his indifference. Don't try to warm a heart that chooses to stay cold. You are not here to beg for connection. You are here to be met, to be seen, to be valued. And one day, someone will look at you and feel lucky just to witness your light. Not because you had to dim it, but because you dared to keep it burning, even when someone else didn't have the eyes to see it. There's a moment, quiet but sharp, when you realize he's no longer listening to understand. You're just speaking to his ego now. You see it in his eyes, in his body, in the way he folds his arms, not out of cold, but as a barrier to connection. His responses are short, clipped, defensive. Not because he doesn't hear you, but because he's too busy protecting a version of himself that can't be questioned, challenged, or wrong. His ego, inflated and fragile, has become louder than his heart. A man's ego is not inherently dangerous. We all have one. It can protect, it can drive, it can even help us rise. But when ego is louder than the heart, when it becomes the dominant voice in the room, love turns into a battlefield. Connection becomes competition, and communication becomes a war of who's right, not what's real. That's where you begin to feel unheard, unseen, and unworthy. Not because you are any of those things, but because there's no room for your truth in a space already crowded by his pride. You were not asking for miracles. You were asking to be met with softness, with honesty, with presence. But all he could hear was threat. All he could see was challenge. And instead of leaning into the discomfort and allowing his heart to stretch and grow, he let his ego stand tall like a wall that said, I won't change, I don't need help, I'm fine the way I am. But fine is not enough. Fine doesn't heal. Fine doesn't hold you on the hard days. Fine doesn't grow roots that last. His ego may have convinced him that love is about being the one in control. That emotion is weakness, that admitting fault is failure. So every time you opened your heart, he shut the door tighter. Every time you tried to speak truth, he turned it into an accusation. Every time you reached out for closeness, he pulled back, because closeness requires humility, and humility is something his ego cannot afford. And here's the cruel irony. Deep down, beneath all that armor, there is a heart, a tender, beating, yearning heart that does want connection. But the ego has trained it to stay silent, trained it to flinch at vulnerability, trained it to see softness as danger. So even when love shows up at the door, it peeks through the curtain but never opens. It watches, wants, and yet chooses self-preservation over surrender. He may have moments where he breaks, moments where he lets his heart whisper through the cracks, where he holds your hand a little longer, or his voice softens when he thinks you might walk away. But those moments are fleeting, because the ego, like a jealous king, doesn't like to be quiet. It rises back up and reminds him to be distant, to be guarded, to protect the image of control. You could feel it, how the relationship became more about navigating his moods than expressing your needs, how you started calculating your tone, choosing your words carefully, trying not to bruise his pride, how you stopped asking for certain things, not because you didn't need them, but because you didn't want to deal with the coldness that would follow. That's when you know the ego has taken over, not just his behavior, but the entire relationship. When a man's ego is louder than his heart, he loses access to his own depth. He forgets how to connect. He forgets how to apologize. He forgets how to say, I was wrong, and truly mean it. Instead, he deflects, he blames, or worse, he acts indifferent as if nothing affects him. But emotional indifference is not strength. It is numbness. It is fear pretending to be power. And a man who leads with ego eventually finds himself alone, not because no one loved him, but because he didn't know how to let them. And you were not too much. You were not too needy, too emotional, or too complicated. You were asking for emotional accountability. You were asking him to show up not with his charm, but with his truth. You weren't asking him to be perfect. You were asking him to be present. And the tragedy is, he could have been. He wanted to be. But his ego convinced him he'd lose something in the process, that to be vulnerable was to be weak, that to say, "I need you," was to admit defeat. So he wore distance like armor and called it independence. But you saw through it. You saw the boy inside the man, the one who still flinched when love got too close, the one who thought being right mattered more than being real, the one who confused silence with peace and power with disconnection. And for a while, you stayed. You stayed and hoped your love could reach him, that your patience could soften him, that your loyalty could convince him that he was safe. But a heart can only whisper for so long before it goes quiet, and maybe he'll never say it. Maybe he'll never admit that he regrets pushing you away. Maybe he'll move on and keep telling himself it was just bad timing or that you asked for too much. But there will be nights, quiet ones, when the noise of his ego fades and all that's left is the echo of what he lost. That's when his heart will finally get a chance to speak, and it will ache. Because the truth is, he didn't need to lose you to grow. He just needed to listen. Ego is not a villain. It's a part of us that's trying to protect. But when it's in charge, it ruins every chance at intimacy. And the man who lets his ego lead will never know the full taste of love, not because it wasn't offered, but because he couldn't accept it. He will keep circling the same emotional deserts, thirsty and proud, confusing silence for strength and solitude for self-sufficiency. And you were the mirror, the lesson, the invitation, not to break him, but to wake him, to show him what it looks like when a woman shows up with her whole heart. You didn't come into his life to fix him. You came to remind him that he has a heart worth using. And if he couldn't hear it over the noise of his own ego, then that's not your failure. It's his fate to face. One day, maybe he'll find the volume knob. Maybe he'll learn to turn down the noise of pride, fear, and image. Maybe he'll let the quieter, braver voice of his heart rise up and guide him. Maybe, but until then, know this: your heart was never the problem. It was the invitation he was too proud to accept. And his ego, the one that cost him your presence, will never love him the way you could have. Time is a patient teacher. It does not rush to reveal truths. It waits. It lets the seasons shift. It lets the silence settle. It lets the dust of pride fall gently to the ground. And in that slow unfolding, it begins to reveal things that were once hidden, things the ego tried to cover up, things the heart was too proud to say, and things that hurt too much to face in the moment. One of the greatest of these revelations is this: his silence wasn't a judgment of your worth. It was a reflection of his own unreadiness, and what he mistook as strength, time will show him as his deepest regret. Because when he ignored you, when he chose not to reply, not to show up, not to be present, he thought he was making a choice for peace or clarity or freedom. But what he was really doing was closing the door on something rare, on a woman who cared enough to speak up, to stay, to fight, to feel. And the problem with men like that is they don't always know what they've lost until they're standing alone with no one left to reach for. Time does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. But those whispers get louder in the quiet spaces he can no longer fill. In the beginning, it's easy for him. He can distract himself. He can pretend he doesn't feel anything. He'll tell himself you were asking too much, that you were overly emotional, that he needed space, that it was better this way. He'll scroll through his phone, go out with friends, maybe even move on to someone else. But even then, the echo of you will still live in the spaces he tries to run from. Because a woman like you does not simply disappear, she leaves a mark. One he won't even recognize until life slows down and his distractions no longer keep him busy enough to forget. You see, time has a way of peeling away the noise. It strips down the excuses. It reveals who was sincere and who was hiding. And one day, long after the last message went unanswered, long after the last tear dried on your pillow, long after you stopped replaying his silences in your mind, he will feel it. Not because you reminded him, not because you reached out again, but because time caught up with his heart. And that's when the regret begins to bloom. Regret doesn't always look like some grand gesture or an apology. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet realization that no one else made him feel like you did. Sometimes it arrives in the moment he hears your name and something sharp stings behind his ribs. Sometimes it looks like a memory he didn't ask for showing up when he least expects it. A laugh, a scent, a song, and suddenly the wall he built around his feelings starts to crack. And here's the thing, his regret has nothing to do with your worth. You were always valuable, always whole, always enough. But he couldn't see it, not because it wasn't there, but because he wasn't ready to receive it. He wasn't ready to match your emotional honesty. He wasn't ready to sit in the discomfort that growth requires. So he walked away. Or worse, he stayed, but gave you only fragments of himself. And in doing so, he lost something he will never be able to recreate. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that hits not when someone leaves, but when you realize they never fully showed up. And you felt that deeply. You gave him grace. You gave him space. You gave him chances. You believed in who he could become, even when he wasn't showing you much to hold on to. And when he pulled away, when he treated your love like it was disposable, he believed you would wait, or that you would return, or that somehow you'd still be there when he was ready. But life doesn't work that way. Hearts don't stay paused forever. Women like you, who feel deeply, love bravely, and offer themselves fully, they may get knocked down, but they don't stay down. They heal, they rise, they stop checking their phones. They stop writing unsent messages. They stop waiting for someone who made them feel like waiting was all they were ever good for. And in the time it takes to heal, to rediscover themselves, to rebuild their peace, something shifts. The weight of his silence no longer defines them. And that's what time teaches both of you. You learn that his indifference was never about your lack. It was about his limits. And he learns, often too late, that your presence was a privilege he never learned how to honor. That your voice, your touch, your willingness to show up with your heart on your sleeve was not weakness. It was grace. It was strength. It was the kind of love that doesn't knock twice. Time will show him that while he was trying to protect his ego, he was sacrificing something sacred. While he was trying to seem unbothered, he was letting go of someone who only ever wanted to understand him. And while he was building walls, you were offering bridges. But bridges cannot stay suspended in midair forever. Eventually, they collapse under the weight of one-sided effort. There may come a day when he tries to come back, when he sends a message, when he tries to reconnect, when he wants to catch up, but it won't be the same. Not because you are bitter, but because you are no longer available for someone who made your love feel like a question mark. You've reclaimed your time. You've filled the empty spaces he left with your own growth. And he may feel regret, but regret is not a key to your heart. It's just a mirror for his own choices. You deserve someone who doesn't need time to realize your value, someone who sees you now, who chooses you now, who listens when you speak and stays when things get hard, because love that is real doesn't wait for silence to make it obvious. It speaks, it shows up, it grows, and when it falters, it takes responsibility, not retreat. So if you ever doubt your worth because of how he treated you, remember this: his silence was not a verdict on your value. It was a confession of his fear, his pride, his unreadiness. Let time do what it does best. Let it whisper the truth into his heart while you continue walking forward. You were never hard to love. You were just offering love to someone who didn't know how to receive it. And now you are free, not because he gave you closure, but because you created your own. You stopped letting his absence define your presence. You stopped letting his avoidance write your story. And that in itself is a quiet, sacred triumph, because in the end, time will not tell the story of your lack. It will tell the story of his loss. And you will not be remembered as the woman who waited in silence, but as the woman who rose in grace. Let him ignore you. Let him sit in the quiet he created. Because a woman who knows her value doesn't beg for attention. She commands respect. And any man who thinks silence makes him strong will eventually learn that strength isn't in what you walk away from, but what you are brave enough to stand for. So walk with your head high, because being ignored by a weak man is not rejection. It's redirection to a life where you are seen, valued, and deeply honored. Let him ignore. Let you rise.